Hey friends, welcome back to Cook with Kris. I am so excited to have you here with me again today. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Kristen Dovniak. I'm a holistic health coach, a certified intuitive eating counselor, and a trained chef. And I love teaching you guys how to cook really simple and delicious recipes that will bring you and your family into the kitchen to enjoy some delicious food that is also nourishing as well. So today I'm going to share with you one of my family's favorite fall recipes, my beef and butternut squash chili. This uses ingredients that you are likely to have around in your kitchen, especially in the fall time. We're using a couple seasonal ingredients and just very simple, but really delicious and really flavorful. So what I'm going to do today, the reason why we are recorded today instead of live is because this is a chili recipe. You can actually make it in the Instant Pot or the slow cooker, but I'm going to share with you the classic way. So it needs to simmer for a little while. So I'm going to kind of share with you the ingredients, the process, and then I'm going to do the whole like TV chef thing where I magically pull it out after it's been simmering for an hour after just a couple minutes. So the other thing I want to share with you guys today is a little bit about flavors and how this chili is an awesome representation of how making sure that you have a balance of flavors really brings out a very simple dish made of really simple ingredients. So let me start by sharing with you what we need for this recipe, and then we'll go ahead and get cooking. So to start, it's a chili recipe. So of course we need an onion. So we have one chopped onion. We're gonna start with a bell pepper as well. You can use whatever color you want. I've got a green bell pepper here, so I've got one small green bell pepper. Meal prep, making sure things are made ahead of time so we don't have to spend a ton of time chopping before we start, but it's always important to mise en place before you start any recipe. That means everything in its place. If you haven't taken a Cook with Kris class with me before, I talk about mise en place all the time. It's basically getting your ingredients ready so when you go ahead to actually cook your dish, it's gonna come together really quick. You need a clove of garlic. Now, this is a monster clove of garlic because we love garlic. So you could start with just one clove of garlic, and if you wanted a little bit more garlicky, you could add two, or you can start with two because you like garlic like we do. This is probably the equivalent of 2 large garlic cloves. You're also gonna need a can of tomatoes. You're gonna need either some broth, you can use vegetable, you can use chicken, you can use beef, or water. I've just got water today because my chicken broth is currently simmering. Of course, you're gonna need some butternut squash because it's a butternut squash chili. This is actually a bean-free chili recipe. So for those of you who have trouble digesting beans or who might not like beans in their chili, this is a really great alternative. And the butternut squash adds a really beautiful sort of extra bite to the chili recipe. So it kind of has that kind of bean-like texture without actually adding beans, and a little bit of sweetness, which we'll talk about. I've got some ground beef here, of course, beef and butternut squash chili. If you want to do like a beefless beef, you are totally welcome to as well. And then we need some spices. So what do I have over here? Chili powder, of course, because it's chili. Cumin, coriander, which is like one of the most probably underused and most delicious spices in my opinion. Some cinnamon, which is one of the secret ingredients that really, really makes this dish delicious. So don't forget the cinnamon. I also love using some smoked paprika, but I don't have any left today, so that's something that you could add in as well. And then I've got some oregano. And the last ingredient, which is my second secret ingredient other than the cinnamon, is a couple tablespoons, 1 to 2, of cocoa powder. This adds a delicious depth to the chili and really plays off of the sweetness of the butternut squash to really bring this recipe together and make it something that's really unique. You're gonna have the classic chili flavors in there, the onions and the pepper and the garlic and the chili powder and the cumin, but adding in that little bit of cocoa powder and that little bit of cinnamon really elevates this dish. It is so, so delicious. So let's go ahead. Oh, and I forgot. Salt, we can't forget salt. I like using some sort of a sea salt. This is real salt. I like a full spectrum of minerals, so something that's kind of pink or gray is always my favorite. It adds a little bit of extra flavor as well. So let's go ahead and get cooking, and while we're simmering, we'll talk a little bit more about spices and how to bring all of these flavors together. Okay, we are over here at the stove. I just turned it on. I've got my Dutch oven over here. Like I said, you can make this in the Instant Pot, and it's pretty much the same process, at least when it comes to sauteing the veggies. You'd start at the saute setting, and then you can turn it on for about 20 minutes, where we're gonna let it simmer on the stove for about an hour to 2 hours, depending on how much time you have before dinner. So I'm gonna start with about a tablespoon. I just do a nice hefty swirl of avocado oil in my Dutch oven, and we're gonna let that heat up for just a second. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add in my onion and my pepper. I'm gonna cook those until they are translucent, so they're starting to turn see-through, and then I am going to go ahead and add in my onion, and then I'm gonna add in my ground beef. And then I will add in my spices. This is really important. It's really important when you are cooking with a variety of spices to add the spices or the dried herbs in at the beginning when you are cooking the meat, to season the meat and to also allow those aromatic compounds that bring the flavor to the dish out from the spices. Yes, this is going to simmer for a while, so they're definitely gonna come out as they cook, but you wanna make sure you're seasoning all of the different components of your dish. It's one of the things that I see a lot of home cooks go wrong, where they put in the seasoning at the end and they don't give it enough time for the flavors to actually come out, or they add in the salt at the end and then their dish tastes a little bit bland and they're like, well, I added as much salt as the recipe said, but you want to make sure that you are actually allowing each individual component of the dish to be seasoned when you are actually cooking it. So I'm gonna let these go ahead and cook for just a couple minutes before adding in that garlic and then adding in the meat. Okay, it's getting a little loud in here, but I just added the garlic, I just added the meat, and I wanted to mention, I forgot to add this at the beginning, but if you wanted to brown the meat first, take it out and then add in the vegetables, you are totally welcome to do that. You just wanna make sure that you're actually seasoning your meat with some salt when you're cooking it. Like I just mentioned, you want to make sure that every part of your dish is seasoned before you actually put it all together. So I just chose to keep it simple and to do it all together today. So I'm just giving the meat a little bit of a chop. I'm going to let it brown for just a minute, and I'm going to add in my spices. So the spices I'm using today, like I mentioned before, are chili powder. I have about a tablespoon of chili powder. Cumin, I have about 2 teaspoons. You're welcome to add more. A half a teaspoon of coriander. If I had it, I would also use a half a teaspoon of smoked paprika, a teaspoon of oregano, and half a teaspoon of cinnamon. That's one of my secret ingredients. It plays off so well with the butternut squash. And then about a half a teaspoon of sea salt that I just added to the beef. So I'm gonna go ahead and add them in. Mix that all around before adding my last few ingredients. Okay, my meat is almost brown, so I'm gonna go ahead and add in my last few ingredients over here. So I've got my canned tomatoes, just 1 can of diced tomatoes. I have about 3 cups of butternut squash. And that secret ingredient, I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of cocoa powder. You could add more if you want a little bit more. And then about a cup's worth of water or broth. You might want to add a bit more salt if you use water instead of broth. And then I'm just going to stir this all together and let it simmer. Okay, you guys, my chili is ready. It has been simmering for a little over an hour. It looks delicious. Now, this is a very thick chili. As you'll see, I'll put a little into a little bowl here. You can absolutely add a little bit more broth or a little bit more water to thin it out a little bit. I'm also going to go ahead and taste it. I'm gonna make sure it cools down for just a second because dishes are actually taste differently when they are cooler versus when they're hot. You can't taste salt as much when it's hot, so when it cools down, if you season it too much when it's hot and taste it when it's burning hot and then it cools down, it might be a little bit too salty. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a little taste, and then I might add a little bit more salt. You could also add a little bit more spice depending on what you would like to add. But you do want to make sure you simmer it for a little bit longer after, because as I shared, you want to make sure that your flavors really meld together. So I'm going to taste it. So good. So other things you can add a tiny, tiny bit of salt. Doesn't need a lot, just a little bit. Make sure to salt from above. You could also add in, I love topping it with a bit of cilantro. You could add a little bit of lime if you feel like it's not, if it needs a little bit of that element of sour to it. It does have a little bit of sweetness from the butternut squash, a little hint of bitterness from the cocoa powder. But if you wanted a little bit of sour, a little bit of lime juice right at the end would be really delicious. But I think it is great with just a little bit of salt. I'll give it one last taste, and I hope you guys will go home and make it yourself. I'm gonna post the recipe just after this, or in my stories if you're watching this on IGTV. So let me know if you make this, how you like it, what you add to it, and I will see you again for Cook with Kris next week. So good.